The bakery smelled like warm sugar and cinnamon that morning, same as every morning. Mira unlocked the front door before sunrise, the way she always did, and set the first tray of bread on the cooling rack by the window. Steam curled off the crust into the cold air. That's when she saw him again, a small white shape, pressed low against the brick wall across the street, watching her, waiting. She'd noticed him 3 mornings in a row now, a tiny kitten, fur matted, ribs faintly visible beneath it. Every time she took a step toward him, he vanished like smoke. "You're hungry, aren't you?" she murmured, more to herself than to him. She set a small piece of bread near the doorway and stepped back inside, watching through the glass. For a long moment nothing moved. Then the kitten crept forward, one careful paw at a time, ears swiveling at every sound. He reached the bread, sniffed it, and then, instead of eating it, he picked it up in his mouth and ran. Mira blinked, startled. Did he just— She stepped outside, staring after him as he disappeared around the corner, the piece of bread nearly the size of his own head, dragging slightly against the pavement. The next morning, it happened again. She set out a fresh piece, expecting him to eat there, in front of her, finally trusting her enough to stay. Instead, the moment her back was turned, he snatched it and bolted. By the 3rd morning, Mira had stopped being surprised and started being curious. "All right, little thief," she said quietly, setting out the bread and staying close to the door this time. "Where do you keep taking it?" The kitten hesitated longer than usual. His eyes, pale green, wary, flicked from her to the bread and back. Hunger won. He grabbed it and ran. This time, Mira followed. She kept her distance, careful not to spook him, staying far enough back that he wouldn't feel chased. He moved fast for something so small, weaving between parked bicycles, ducking under a fence, never once slowing down to eat. That was the strangest part. Any hungry animal would have stopped by now, found a quiet corner, eaten. He didn't. He crossed the empty lot behind the fruit stand, past the rusted gate no one used anymore, the bread still clamped tight in his jaws. Twice he stumbled, the weight of it nearly too much for his small frame. Twice he picked himself back up and kept going. Mira's chest tightened, though she couldn't have said exactly why. "Where are you taking that?" she whispered. The kitten slowed at last near the old stone wall at the edge of the alley, the one half collapsed, ivy creeping through its cracks, a place people usually walked past without a second glance. He looked back once, straight at her. Then he pushed through a narrow gap in the stones and was gone. Mira stood frozen for a moment, the morning light catching the dust he'd kicked up behind him. She stepped closer to the wall, crouched low, and listened. That's when she heard it. Faint, muffled, coming from somewhere deep inside the broken stone. Tiny cries, more than one. Mira's hand froze halfway to the gap in the wall. Mira stayed frozen at the crack in the wall, watching. The smallest kitten hadn't moved, not when the others shifted around it, not when the white kitten pressed against its side, nudging gently with his nose over and over, the way he had every morning with the bread. This time there was no response. The white kitten's cries grew sharper, higher. He nudged harder, pawed at the small body beneath him, refused to stop even as his own legs trembled with the effort of staying upright. Mira's hands shook against the cold stone. She didn't think, she just moved. Her fingers found the edge of the gap and pulled, widening it just enough, ignoring the scrape of rough stone against her skin. She reached through slowly, palm open, and let her hand rest near the huddle of kittens without grabbing, without rushing. The white kitten spun toward her, teeth bared, every inch of his small body between her hand and his family. "I'm not going to hurt them," she whispered. "I promise." He didn't move, didn't blink. His pale green eyes locked on hers, ears flat, fur raised along his spine, every part of him ready to fight something 10 times his size if it meant protecting the ones behind him. Mira held still. Let him look at her. Let him decide. Seconds passed like hours. Then, slowly, his shoulders dropped. Not trust, not yet. Just exhaustion winning over fear. She reached past him carefully and touched the smallest kitten's side. Still warm, still breathing. Barely. Relief hit her so hard her eyes blurred. "He's alive," she breathed. "He's still with us." The tiny body stirred weakly at her touch, a faint rasping sound escaping it, not strong but there. The white kitten's whole posture changed in an instant, the tension draining out of him as if someone had cut a wire. He sat back on his haunches beside his sibling, sides heaving, and for the first time since Mira had started watching him, he looked less like a fighter and more like what he actually was, a kitten, small, starving, exhausted from carrying more than he should have ever had to carry alone. Mira looked around the hollow properly now, really looked. 3 other kittens pressed into the corner, thin enough that she could count their ribs through matted fur. No mother in sight, no food but the scraps the white kitten had dragged here piece by piece, morning after morning, at the cost of his own strength. He hadn't been stealing because he was bad. He'd been the only one strong enough to try. "You did this," Mira whispered, shaking her head slowly. "All of it, all by yourself." The white kitten looked up at her, and for a moment neither of them moved. Just 2 creatures, worlds apart, understanding each other in the quiet. Then he did something he'd never done in 3 days of watching her. He didn't run. He stayed exactly where he was, guarding his family, but he let her stay too. Mira sat back on her heels, mind already racing ahead. Food, warmth, something to carry them all safely out of the cold stone hollow before nightfall. She glanced at the smallest kitten, still breathing, still fighting. There wasn't time to waste. "Wait right here," she said softly, easing her hand back through the gap. "I'm going to fix this." She rose to her feet, glancing back once at the small white shape standing guard in the dark. A thief no more, just a brother who had never once put himself first. Mira ran back to the bakery faster than she had run in years. She grabbed a clean towel from behind the counter, filled a small bowl with warm milk, and wrapped several pieces of soft bread in a cloth. Her hands moved quickly, but her mind stayed on the hollow behind the wall, on 4 small bodies huddled together in the cold, on one exhausted kitten standing guard over the rest. She grabbed a shallow crate lined with an old blanket and headed back. The walk that had once felt long now felt endless. When she reached the gap in the stone wall, she knelt down slowly, the same way she had before. "It's me," she said quietly, though she knew he couldn't understand the words, only the tone, only the fact that she'd come back. The white kitten was exactly where she'd left him, pressed against his smallest sibling, ears twitching at the sound of her voice. This time he didn't bare his teeth. He watched as she reached through with the bowl of warm milk first, setting it carefully inside the hollow. He hesitated, glancing between her and his family, torn between old instinct and something new. Then, slowly, he stepped aside. One by one, the other kittens noticed the smell of warm milk and crept forward on shaking legs. The white kitten watched them drink before he moved an inch toward it himself, old habits dying hard even now. "There's enough," Mira said softly, sliding the bread closer too. "There's enough for everyone. You don't have to do this alone anymore." The smallest kitten, still weak, managed a small sip of milk, and Mira felt something in her chest loosen for the first time since she'd first heard those cries through the stone. She widened the gap carefully, stone by stone, until it was large enough to slide the lined crate through. Gently, one at a time, she lifted each kitten into the soft blanket, the smallest first, then the others, until only the white kitten remained outside the crate, watching. He looked at the wall, at the alley, at the only home he'd known. Then he looked at his siblings, safe and warm for the first time in days. He climbed in after them. Mira carried the crate back to the bakery slowly, careful not to jostle them, murmuring softly the whole way, not because they understood her, but because she needed to say it. "You did good," she told him. "You did so good." Back at the shop, she set up a warm corner near the ovens, away from the draft, and laid the blanket down. The kittens settled in almost immediately, drawn to the warmth, curling together the way they had in the hollow, except now there was no fear in it, no hunger driving them. The white kitten settled last, still watchful, still cautious. He stayed near the edge of the blanket, positioned between his family and the door, even here. Old habits, but as the days passed, something in him began to change. He stopped flinching when Mira walked by, stopped watching the door like danger might come through it. He began sleeping curled fully among his siblings instead of guarding their edges. And one morning when Mira set down a fresh piece of bread, he simply ate it, right there, in front of her, without running. No more stealing. No more disappearing around corners with food clenched in his jaws. No more crossing town alone while his own strength gave out. Just a small white kitten, finally allowed to be small, finally allowed to rest. Mira watched him from behind the counter one quiet morning, sunlight spilling gold across the bakery floor, 4 kittens sleeping in a warm tangle by the oven. She thought about how she'd once called him a thief. She knew better now. He hadn't been stealing because he was bad. He'd been carrying his whole world on his back, one piece of bread at a time, and he'd never once put himself first, until someone finally let him.